So today, first of all, as Jenna mentioned, we're recording this session. This session will be recorded and then uploaded to YouTube so that everybody can view it and share it with their friends and peers. Before we start any session, I'd like to do a little bit of a land acknowledgement. It's great to see all the faces this morning and afternoon for some of you. We're joining each other from various different unceded lands and territories. I myself, as well as my co-host Chris Krug, we live and work in the city of Vancouver, which is situated on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The Impact Relations Institute recently dedicated its July newsletter to the topic of land acknowledgements, where we cited links and resources that will help ensure that your land acknowledgements are more than a performative action before a meeting. So at the end of this session, we will share that link so that you can read up on that. Essentially, it basically says, educate yourself more, understand about reconciliation, provide consultancy to your organization on reconciliation, and there's some links and tools on how you can do that. So we will share that link. It looks like Jenna just dropped it in now. Perfect. Again, this session will be uploaded to YouTube. We'll share that link as well. You can catch some of our previous impact councils where we've met with Patagonia, Southwest Airlines, Kind Snacks, Frall Raven, Greystone Bakery, and of course Ben & Jerry's has been on a couple times, being one of the founding board members. In those channels, you can learn more about responsible impact communications. Final couple of housekeeping items before I dive into today's session. Please keep yourself muted throughout the session. Last 10 minutes will be reserved for audience Q&As as always. And before we do that, we're going to do a quick 5-minute, 10-minute, depending on how much time we have towards the end of our panel, to do a live demo with Chris Krug, who's going to walk us through some predictive trends, how we can use AI for predictive trends. So let me take a step back. My name is Melissa Orozco. I will be one of your hosts and moderators today. I'm the founder of UV Public Relations, and I'm the co-founding board member of the Impact Relations Institute. Beside me is my longtime friend, and I'm a big fan of this guy, Chris Krug. He's a cybernetic brand expert. He's a coach, and I think like one of the most interesting conversation pushers on all things AI and anything in the future. I've actually learned a great deal from him just preparing for this session. So I'm excited for you guys to hear how he unpacks some of the questions with me along the panel. And then also this demo at the end is going to be really fun. If you're joining us for the first time today, the Impact Relations Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit. We're dedicated to educating professional communicators on the discipline of authentic and transparent communications and how to use the tools of communications to drive positive systemic change. Our global network consists of more than 1,200 communicators around the world who stand in solidarity to demonstrate and promote the importance of responsible and purpose-led communications practices. We welcome any of you to join us in our ongoing journey to promote and display these principles. And all you have to do is go to impactrelations.org/pledge and you be part of our community. For some of you that don't already know this, a big part of our mission is keeping these learnings widely accessible to everyone, to folks everywhere. So each month we host these free to attend impact councils. Our impact councils feature inspiring communicators and brands discussing important topics, trends, best practices that are critical for authentic communications. Most importantly, we're learning about solutions to some of the issues impacting society today. So thank you for your patience on that. That brings us to our speakers and our topic today. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that artificial intelligence is poised to either revolutionize or scorch the earth of communications industry, depending on who you ask. We're going to have some varying perspectives on that today. And we're going to wrap our minds around the power of AI and its potential and discuss the ethical communications, ethical implications for impact communications and the media. To walk us through this timely and really relevant topic, we're joined by two experts in the digital technology space. We have Dr. Lisa Costa. She's the Chief Technology Officer and Innovation Officer for the United States Space Force. She's actually joining us from the Pentagon. So while we're doing our tech check, she had a hard time just getting through because there's a lot of security blocks, which is very cool. thought I'd mention that. And then we also have Robert Scales. He's an educator and the author of a beginner's guide to ChatGPT. Everybody wants to know what ChatGPT is like capable of. It's terrifying. It's exciting. Is it ethical or unethical to use it in a communications industry? Are we cheating? There's so many questions. So we're going to unpack those today. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to our questions. Give me a second. Thank you to our hosts who are here with us. So, Lisa, I'm going to start the first question with you. Okay. Can everybody see me? Just need a thumbs up. Okay, lovely. I have it stuck on somebody else, and I just want to make sure that nobody else's view is like that. So Lisa, as the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer for the United States Space Force, how do you balance the potential benefits of AI and the need to address ethical concerns and ensure that AI is used responsibly? And when I ask this, we're looking at it from the lens of communicators. So how do you think, in addition to that, how do you think responsible communicators should engage with this technology in terms of abiding by ethical AI practices? It's a two-part question. I'll let you start wherever you'd like.
It is, and first, let me just say thank you for the invitation to be here, and also I am speaking on my own and not, in my official capacity, and so my comments are my own and not those of the Department of Defense. But that being said, the Department of Defense has put out guidelines for responsible AI. And I think that's really critical, right? Responsible AI has to be built in, and that's really challenging when pieces of data are missing. And what do I mean by that? For example, what is the list of data that OpenAI has trained ChatGPT on? I would like to know that. They keep that kind of as part of their secret sauce. And there's a good reason for that, because last week, I think Wikipedia and some other giants of data repositories wrote blockers to ChatGPT's web scrapers. So now they're blocked from using that information. And I'll tell you, that worries me a lot because for as, crowdsourced as Wikipedia is, it is fact checked. And removing that from the basis of ChatGPT, now I have to worry about more information being focused on social media, lots of bias, lots of information that is less than beneficial to individuals and certain groups of individuals in particular.
For sure, there's a lot of sources that are less trustworthy than Wikipedia.
Absolutely.
And I forgot to mention this at the start of things, but when Chris and I were preparing the questions for today's panel, we used AI to help generate them, just to show how strong this tool is. These questions are largely generated from AI, and we dropped wiki links in there to produce some of the background to provide content for that. So I am sad to hear that there's a blocker from Wiki, because that was actually the only tool I really trusted. I'm not really sure where to go from there. But again, I don't really know if I should be using it in the first place. There's ethical implications with that. So that kind of takes us to our second part of the question. What are your thoughts on that, I guess Lisa or Robert, on like for communicators, how should we engage with this technology? Is there any thoughts about like ethical implications of us engaging with AI for communications practices?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in on the second part and then over to Robert on that, who probably has a lot to say about it. But, my view is this, all is fair in love and war, right? And the same is true, right? These tools are out there. There is a narrative out there. And by the way, I am incredibly sympathetic to the Hollywood writers and others, but I think some of their messaging is off. And what I mean by that is one of the messages is we want to be protected. We want to be protected from the displacement of generative AI. You know, there have been millions of people displaced by technology developments over thousands of years. People are not going to be, quote, protected. What you have to do is determine, okay, how can this allow me to be more creative? How
Mhm.
can this allow me to be more productive? And how can this knowledge of using these tools help me be someone who can work for the force of good, right? And so I think that you have to embrace them. And I think blocking them or blocking them in school is just like saying you couldn't use a calculator. You know, when I was a kid, it was like, oh,
For
you can't use a
example.
calculator in calculus.
Or spell check.
So,
Sorry, you
yeah,
can't use spell check on this essay.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting that they chose to block them as the way to handle it, because all they're really doing is cutting off their source of knowledge from the rest of the world. And as someone who's here in Canada, that's like really hits home, because Canada just blocked, a lot of the social networks because they said they were stealing jobs from journalists. So you can't link to Facebook anymore from Canadian, on Facebook, you can't link to different sites and stuff. So it's really weird that they would shut down access to it as their response.
It'll be interesting to see how it goes. Like, obviously, KK and I have been a massive fan of um, both Creative Commons and open source tools. Like a long time ago, we co-held a company together and we did development of open source tools. And it's interesting to see, because for me, like, as we're seeing artificial intelligence being used either for communication or development, like, for example, like, as much as the questions today were like powered by artificial intelligence, I co-created ChatGPT for writing the book with me, because I did use part of it for structuring the book, for like engaging in conversation. And so if we're looking at building on what Dr. Costa was just mentioning with regards to how the benefit, the potential, the responsibility and use of AI, data validation into the model is one of the most important things that we need to focus on. Data and security and the source of data, the data validation. And so if we're removing active source of information that are validated, like, we're seeing now, that's going to drastically affect the input that we are adding to our models and the training data that we're pushing. And I think we're skipping a few questions in going forward. So, yeah.
I want to jump in actually with a follow-up for Dr. Costa there. So you said, we're not going to necessarily guarantee you protection. It's about asking yourself how creative you can become. And that kind of begs the question. A lot of people critique AI and they say it's not creative at all. It's just stealing all these artists' information and regurgitating back some other thing. It's never generated a new idea, an original thought or original piece of art. And I don't think that's true. And it doesn't sound like you do either. So would you talk to me a little bit about, do you think AI can actually be creative?
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that AI can be creative, especially generative AI, and especially non-supervised deep learning. You never know exactly what the AI is doing, right? In unsupervised deep learning. And oftentimes you can be surprised. And when you start to provide billions of pieces of information to it, yes, it can combine that information in new and novel ways to um, really, I would argue, stir the soul, whether it's poetry, a story, a piece of art. I have an extensive art collection, and I am blown away by the speech to image work that's being done in generative AI. And I do believe it is creating original art. So that really raises this big question about what it means to be inherently human. I think that's what scares people, right? Especially creatives who, I've heard this term
Oh no.
Oh, the
No,
Pentagon security force strikes again.
Skills, do you,
Oh,
no, no,
do you
no,
want to
no.
jump in?
foresee.
Hey,
Okay.
Skills, this is a great chance for you to just jump in and riff on it though a little bit if you'd like.
Well, maybe we should talk about like deep fakes and like, you know, like jumping from creative AI to like deep fakes. Because
So, okay, Robert,
I'm
let
of
me
the
ask
same.
my next question because it's actually on deepfakes. So let me just ask my next question.
Cool,
That way
cool,
we
cool.
get everything into it. So in your book, you discuss the concept of deepfakes and their potential to impact society. So could you elaborate on how AI-powered deepfakes could be used to manipulate public opinion? A build on from that is that many people joining us today are representing high-profile CEOs and spokespeople that may be susceptible to deepfake targeting. So any thoughts on that would pertain to this audience and people that they're representing? I'd just like you to add whatever commentary you were about to dive into.
Sounds great. All right. So first, I'll add to what Dr. Costa was just saying, which AI, in my view as well, is creative. And I think they'll go a lot deeper, but we see that in Midjourney, we see that in creations, we see that in text to image, voice to image, and so on. And so that brings us to like really deep fake, which is synthetic media. Like when you're using technology to create image or videos, face recognition, voice, anything to duplicate another person. And so, and I'm not talking like the Tom Cruise cool video that you see on Facebook where it's not actually Tom Cruise.
We
it's
all
just
know that one.
yeah. Like I'm assuming everybody has seen those. Like we're talking really deep down video that have been doctored and re-engineered to make something that didn't really exist. So how is deepfake going to affect us, and how are deepfake going to affect communication and CEOs and different people? From the top down, if we're looking at political propaganda, the ability to use that for political campaign is quite incredible. You can make all sorts of video. I mean, not that it really mattered because it seems that the last 8 years of politics have erased being able to do anything negative and still being able to get elected. So in that concept, and we have Dr. Costa back, and in that concept, I think we're going to see more and more of that. But you're seeing misinformation, you're seeing manipulation of journalism, where authentic journalism really relied on credible source. And now we're seeing more and more cases where there's made up scores that are done. Here's an example. There's a comedy club here in Quebec that was having a bill with only male lineup. And they generated a fake female comedian to add to the lineup to attract other people. I mean, it's not like Quebec lacked female comedian. So those are examples. You know, this is minor deep fake, but they created a person that was supposed to be there that night and just an excuse. Oh no, she couldn't make it, like she was sick. You know, so yeah. That's minor example of deep fake. But then we get into like, how is that going to affect social engineering of fraud? Like, you know, like your phone is ringing, you're an older person, you don't really know about technology. There's a voice that you know, and it's asking you for money because they're in jail and they need to be bailed, your nephew or whatever it is. Or it could be like your trusted banker or your priest. Like, I mean, that would be a really good target for like Midwest US, you know, like priest calling people, fake voice, asking them for donation, raise money. So social engineering fraud, you'll see that happening. It'll test the public trust because people won't be, it used to be you can trust what you see and what you hear. But when what you see and what you hear can no longer be trusted, how do you validate your information and your source? And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of change. That brings us to, okay, there's a problem. How is this going to be changed? So mitigation, what we need to do is create better algorithm that will detect those, maybe like digital watermarks. Sorry, Chris.
Let me just pause you for 1 sec. I mean, you're really speaking to something important. It's like, I've been telling people you can never trust a piece of digital anything you ever see again unless you saw it made right in front of your eyes. And people think it's very extreme for me to say that, but like whether it be a voicemail or a photo, an email, you can almost trust that nothing anymore is something unless it happened live in front of you.
Well, and I think with that, we're going to start seeing more regulations coming out. Like I think better algorithm to detect if it's fake or not will come out. Digital watermarking has to become part of our identity. The same thing as when we're putting our print, anything else, computers will need to be marking what they're doing. Public awareness, media responsibilities, like platform policies will also be like something that we'll see happening. So I think within this context, is the concept of like deepfake going to like become a bigger problem? I believe so. And I think as we're moving with data, like a lot of people are afraid of now doing interviews because they believe that that data might be used to create training data against them. So, that creates a few issues. And I think maybe somebody else on the team has more comments on that one.
I'd love to push it over to Lisa, because Lisa, in our initial calls, you talked about discouraging CEOs from being spokespeople of companies because it just allows more video content of that person out there to be manipulated as a deep fake, and then them go and say a message that they never said. So can you talk a little bit about that scary thought and notion?
Absolutely. So, and none of us know where life will take us, right? And so we don't know in our teens if in our 40s we're going to be a CEO of a trillion-dollar company, right? And so, you know, we used to say to kids, be careful of the content you put on because it stays on forever. It doesn't matter if you erase it, etc. Well, now it's far more than that. Now it is, I can take that voice, I can take those images, I can make you be perhaps saying things you shouldn't have, no one should have said, right? And used in negative campaigns. I could, if I am your business competitor, I could be behind that, right? Business espionage. Espionage is not limited to governments. It is a big part of industry. And we have to realize that individuals can, their personalized data and the data that other people post about them. And I can't emphasize this enough, that a lot of times it's not the individual themselves that's posting the information, but other people posting the information.
Yeah.
I will highlight that, an iPhone, has a camera of, 24 gigabytes. So if you think things like biometrics is going to save you, right? As an aspect of security and things like that. Well, guess what? That kind of breaks retinal scanning, right? And lots of other things, right? So it's really an issue. Don't want to scare people, but on the other hand, they should understand, one, the information they're putting out there, and two, nothing is free, right? You're paying for it with your personalized information, and that information is going to be used to target you. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be targeted by competition or nation state, but you're certainly being targeted every day by literally hundreds of brands, right, in ad markets.
Yeah.
And this data is being used by generative AI to skim the cream of the crop, identify individuals in certain target markets, and then personalize information for those individuals, inspiring them to maybe buy things that they can't afford, that they don't need, or to read information that is either misinformation, just getting the information wrong, or disinformation, which last week it was a great Meta announced taking down the largest disinformation campaign in the history of uh, online.
The whole wide world.
Yes, exactly. Over 50
wow.
websites, over 100,000 accounts. perpetuated by the People's Republic of China. So, so that is was a disinformation campaign focused on many different topics. One was the origin of COVID. The second was the effectiveness of the U.S.-led COVID vaccines, but then also policies toward Taiwan, et cetera. And then, the latest is the amplification by the People's Republic of China of Russian disinformation campaigns against Ukraine. So, Robert is exactly spot on. You cannot trust what you read and see, and fact checking is going to be one of those areas that is absolutely critical. And watermarking is important, but watermarking without blockchain and custody, secure custody of information is probably going to be insufficient. And so we're going to need multiple paths for security for information.
Before we jump into blockchain and stuff like that, because it's a whole different direction and technically kind of complicated, I want to challenge you, Dr. Costa, about like the idea that people shouldn't put themselves out there because they're making themselves susceptible to deepfakes by having more audio and video data out there in the world. Maybe this is a little counterintuitive, but there's going to be sensors everywhere. The next large language models are built on Tesla data, Tesla audio and video data that they gather from every Tesla in the whole wide world. And so it's going to already be listening to your conversations as you walk across crosswalks in front of Teslas and capturing your likeness and then using that to train large language models and stuff. And so isn't it the opposite of what you said? Don't we make ourselves like less at risk by putting our actual voice and our actual video and our actual person out there into the world? Because by doing so, you can actually fact check me, like you say. You can say, I just saw this video of Chris Krug. It seems weird. Let me go check some other videos he's made that are, I don't know, like you said, fingerprinted.
Who's gonna do that? Who's gonna go and check the other videos? Like most people
that's the point. I think
we're talking nation states here and stuff. If we're talking nation states here and stuff and disinformation, an army of journalists, an army
journalists, yes,
or AIs. How about AIs?
But Chris, let me jump on this in 2 seconds.
I could feed an AI 5 authenticated videos of you and then have it look at 500 unknown videos of you and determine based on the authenticated ones which ones are deepfakes.
You would assume. That's assuming like your data in the first place was original, and there's a lot of data that goes into like analyzing this at the end of the day. I think I'll get back to 2 things that Lisa just mentioned though, is content personalization. Like one of the things, like we're talking about deepfake at the level of like a malicious state wanting to do something. For the average Joe, the average American, the average Canadian, it doesn't mean anything to them. Yeah, sure, maybe the result of the election will be changed and that sort of things. But I mean, since 2000, we've seen that happening every so often. So, at the end of the day, I think when we're looking at deepfake, for me, like the content evaluation and the amount of content that you have out there from your Facebook profile, that's the best one. Facebook profile, most of us have been on it for 20 plus years. We have a full profile that is perfect for marketing. You can go in, you can see what I like, what I don't like, where I've been, what I've done. So now that you're getting into content personalization and automated content, that's going to create a lot of issues. And I think I'm more concerned about deepfake in the form of audio and videos for scamming people and getting them, like there's much to say about emotional manipulation and nostalgia manipulation. And if you're using nostalgia and emotions to go at people for marketing, brand communication, to extract their money, to get them to buy things that they don't necessarily believe or need, and to get them to buy into an illusion, you can really manipulate society in a lot of ways. And I think as we're seeing ourselves out there with the content that we're creating and the content that we're producing, we're putting ourselves more susceptible to be attacked in that way. And yes, I think it could affect companies and CEO that are making false claim. But again, that's going to go to good old PR of having a good team that is behind that will be able to debunk that what has been announced is not actually a video made by Chris Krug, and that the comment were done by an organization that tried to target and that sort of thing. And I think that's where we're going to get into solution of active human remodeling of those deep fake news that are affecting the individual. So for me, it's not about is the deep fake content that is being created out there going to be affecting a nation. Yeah, for sure. You see malicious and like from North Korea to China affecting other countries in Europe. You've seen that. You've seen in North America and so on. For me, it's more about the end of the day, the user and how the user is going to be affected by the content. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to jump in and bring us back to sort of how this pertains to communications industry, because this deep fake, we can do a whole session on this, and we're going down a deep rabbit hole.
For sure.
So one of the questions that was brought up from our audience that I wanted to bring to both of you, I have two workforce related questions, but for both of you, how do you see AI impacting the job market and the future work in the communications industry? I know we've kind of touched on this already, but I wanted to just directly ask that question. And what are some steps that individuals and organizations can take to prepare for these changes? So how the AI going to impact this group's industry?
Well, in this particular industry is going to be impacted significantly. You know, some less so, but this one in particular is going to be dramatic.
I'm hearing about 15% layoffs in marketing departments already.
And not only that, you know, graphic artists, right? Using graphic artists,
data analytics.
But yeah, exactly. You know,
how can the industry prepare itself for this? Like, how can you make yourself resilient to this technology and make yourself still needed?
That's a great question, but I think there are certainly areas, right? So for example, we talked about fact checking, right? And who knows better, frankly, how to fact check than a journalist? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's critical. Having journalists involved in multidisciplinary teams to help identify mis and disinformation campaigns or cyber attacks is really critical. So there's a new role opening up now, I think, for journalists to have a role on these red teams, right? I think that from a cybersecurity perspective, it's now kind of opened up new avenues for needing people like journalists on the team. And but I also look at it as, you know, think about how limited we are in communications in a country, in any given country. We tend to focus and think in the language that is our first, you know, spoken language. We tend then to limit ourselves with that. And so by opening up the aperture by using natural language processing and machine translation to think about things in new ways and the way other cultures might think about the same topic, I think that's a hugely creative role for journalists, right? It's the artistic role, I think, that drew a lot of people into journalism and communications to begin with. So I would just urge people to kind of explore those new areas that are being made available.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an invitation to update your skills, because I don't think a lot of these jobs are going to be lost to AI bots. They're going to be lost to people who know how to use AI bots.
That's true. Yeah.
That's the key point here, like that Chris is saying, is that like for individuals, I think skill upgrading, adaptability, being able to specialize into a field, go deep into that, networking, lifelong learning, those are going to be like very important for people that want to do change, be part of that change and secure their role into that new trend. And then for organizations, training program for their employees, like adding new ways for them to use those tools, strategic planning around how it's great that you're bringing AI into your company, but how are you validating that? How are you using that? How is the AI being monitored? You still need humans behind it. So that will be like the strategic planning. The ethical guidelines around that are quite massive. There could be like a lot of topics around this. Human AI collaborations. Like I mentioned earlier, like, you know, I co-credited ChatGPT as co-writer on the book because of the collaboration that is happening with AI. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. Transparency. Transparency is going to be really massive in terms of like being able to open communication agencies and how they're using those tools. That would be
So
my
then
point on individual organization.
Do you think that from an ethical perspective, we should be citing if ChatGPT was used to help generate some of the copy that we put out there?
I'm assuming that every agencies right now that is doing copy is using ChatGPT as part of their strategy. You would be dumb fuck to be not doing that. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like having a calculator and not using it. And I'm not talking about just your basic calculator. I'm talking about scientific functions of your calculator to go deeper into algebra and so on. I mean, ChatGPT can help you develop your strategy for communication. It can help you target specific segment of the market. It can help you find the data around that based on your newsletter and people that are reading it. You can export that data and you can see how they're using it. You can create better content based on that. So I think for an agency to not use AI would be like a downfall. You'll have to. You just don't have any choice. Now, do you have to reveal? I think it has to be said somewhere in there that you are working with it. But it's the same thing as like a photographer like Chris saying, I'm using Photoshop to edit my photos, or a mathematician saying, I'm using a calculator to validate my calculation. At the end of the day, I think it's just going to become a tool. And do you say that you're using a computer to write your essay? I mean, it's assumed, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, which part do you actually credit anyway? Do you credit the fact that the building you're standing in was designed by architects that used AI to design it, or do you recommend or you cite the fact that the writing was done, or the images are done, the ideas came from it? It's like, where do you actually credit the AI?
I don't know. Okay,
right on the cover of the book. Right on the cover of the book.
I have another workforce related question pertaining to the concern that AI could exacerbate existing inequalities. We've touched on this through this chat. For example, AI tools could displace human workers in certain industries, or AI-powered algorithms could perpetuate biases in hiring and promotion. So how do you address these concerns? What steps can be taken to ensure that the benefits of AI are shared fairly across society?
Do you want me to go first? Sure. All right. So from my point of view, there's 4 areas. There's going to be policymaker, where will be maybe controversial, but the idea of floating a universal basic income, like, we should really go back to that. Like, the idea that everybody can get a basic income and be able to develop themselves and push, I think would add. Anyway, that's a bigger one. Around the policymaker, reskilling. If we can do reskilling program to help people find better job, maybe we won't have the same issues that we had with industrialization and the change of machinery about 100, 150 years ago. Regulation on oversight, safety net for social services, policies. Around the industry, we need bias audit, transparency, ethical AI team. Like, each company should have somebody that is responsible for ethics AI usage, or at least somebody that is aware of that. Just the same as an office usually have somebody that knows CPR and first aid in case somebody gets hurt. Should have somebody that is part of that. Human-centric design, I think, is going to be very important, because as long as we maintain the human factor within this, it's going to keep us, or keep our humanity. I think education, curriculum update, and accessibility will be very important in terms of like changing how we're moving. Like, if we're starting from early on with education in creative thinking, critical thinking, ability to use artificial intelligence to debate the topic, as opposed to write your essay using AI, debate the topic with AI, and then generate a document that will output your views on it. There's many ways that we can go around in education to prepare the next generation to use artificial intelligence. Chris, you wanted to say?
Yeah, let me just like slow your roll for 1 second. So I'm not sure that you're actually speaking to the potential harm that I think that Melissa has raised here. And so I think
I'm more looking at the solution that we can look at as opposed to the harm of it, because we've been concentrating on like how harmful AI are. But if we can work together as a society to
no
establish
skills.
base,
No
yeah,
skills.
go
I
ahead.
think
Sorry.
it's more subtle than that. I think a lot of the focus on the harm has been around like, killer robots coming back and destroying us all, or, everyone losing their jobs or whatever. But we haven't really talked much about the harm of like rich people with access to the best AIs, using that to at an increasingly fast rate become much richer, and a bigger gap between rich and poor, or corporations, the best corporations, the richest corporations in the world, developing AI that only they have access to, and using those AIs to develop proprietary information that distances the people inside that organization from the rest of the world. Or even like countries, like a lot of people predict the wars of the future are going to fought between AIs, and a lot of our monies will be spent, making better AIs to fight other AIs and stuff. And so I appreciate the solutions you're putting forward, but I think pausing for a moment and thinking about how do we train AIs and use AIs in such a way that they don't exasperate the differences that already exist between us, and really start to solve some of the equity problems that we face is like an important place to focus our energy.
Sure.
I think one of the challenges that we have in that area is that um, we, the United States, Canada, Britain, and others, do place a high value on responsibility, but others do not. And that's going to be a huge challenge for us. I think one of the biggest um, strengths that we have on our side is to embrace cognitive diversity in teams, right? So I noticed in
Oh dear.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Damn it. Well,
about that. Sorry
yeah.
about that. So
Back.
now I was going to say cognitive diversity is really important. I noticed, there was something in the chat about that. Let me tell you, you have to really be concerned about cognitive warfare, right, with AI. And
Can you explain what that is?
I'm sorry?
Can you explain
Can
what
you
that
explain what that is?
Yeah, so cognitive warfare, focusing on under causing, for example, more turbulence in a society where there's distrust, right, against a government, or in your own government, producing content that raises nationalism and that raises positive sentiment toward the military or the government. So that's what I mean by cognitive warfare, and then focusing toward, if you know, I don't know, take your pick. Country X is military is comprised of primarily this kind of person that believes this. You can conduct cognitive warfare on that person's military by creating content that speaks emotionally, as Robert, called out, to that population specifically, and do things to it, right? You can raise it up, you can lower it down, you can create lots of waves of discontent and confusion. And so I think it's really important to note that that is not something that responsible AI users would embrace, but that is not to say that that kind of warfare would not be embraced by others.
You're hitting the nail right on the head, Dr. Costa, but you're also speaking to what really scares me. And so I think that I'm not a big believer in the kind of existential threat killer robot theories, but I think if those theories were to come true, it's not going to be rogue actors that are going to be putting AIs in place that threaten the existence of us all. It's actually going to be the system that an international government or a government like the US puts in place to control the rogue AIs. That's going to be the real Skynet. The real thing that we can't, escape from is the system that we collectively agree to implement to keep the bad guys AIs from using their AIs against us?
I'm going to jump in. Just because we've
please.
got a limited amount of time, and I'm sorry, I hate to cut this off because it's very, very interesting, but I want to save some time for Chris to walk us through this predictive technology, because yes, we are talking about a lot of the gloom and doom that comes with AI, but I really wanted to let Chris walk us through a quick short demo of a tool that is a really good resource for us. So in the communications industry, we're often looking for trend analysis for our clients. We want to know what's happening in a specific industry, what's going to happen. And Chris is just going to take us through a very quick demo of a predictive trend. So if anybody has like a question that they wanted to drop into the chat, I have one on the side. If anybody doesn't, I was going to ask what's the future of ESG looking like from a credibility perspective. But if anybody has another question, we can drop that in.
Am I sharing there, Melissa?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, hold on. Yeah, let's even maybe just take it one step back. So the purpose of the, am I sharing now?
Now I see a deep.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. I'll close that chat. And the purpose of this demo was so many times it's easy to get locked into the mindset of us using GPT or AIs to write things or to generate some images, especially in the PR, marketing, and communications industries. And you know, Scales talked about crediting his book, and Melissa asked about, you know, is it ethical to use these things in our agencies? And really, in some ways, it's just scratching the surface. And I just wanted to do a tiny little like object lesson demo here to illustrate that. And so I am going to ask the AI some questions. We'll do it together and we'll see what it comes up with. And so I'm just going to ask it to look into the future on a couple topics, and Melissa and then we're going to have it develop some strategy and maybe some tactics around the different trends that it predicts or whatever and stuff. So maybe just jot into the chat if you want to a question that you would like.
You want to know about the future.
Of our industry. And I'll start by saying that I'm showing you guys a new tool here that I just started working with this week. It's really fun. Those of you who are my age or older than me might remember like Trillium, and that was the instant messaging platform that combined all the other instant messengers into one space, so I didn't have to open 8 messengers to talk to my friends. This is the Trillium of friend bot talking. So this is a bunch of different AIs. You'll see here I've been running some cloud searches and some Google Palm searches, as well as Facebook's Llama AI, and then ChatGPT over here you'll see. And then down here, there's some other things like Midjourney is the one a lot of us been using to generate images from. And there's all sorts of, you know, there's new AIs coming on the market every single day that do all sorts of quirky things, from write role-playing games to translate your book into emojis. And I found that Poe has been a great way for me to compare and contrast different things, different AIs that are available right now. I've been finding Cloud very useful. You see it says right there, Cloud instant 100K. This one Cloud allows us to use 100,000 token inputs, and the tokens refers to how much text you can feed it or how much text it'll feed you back. And for a while, ChatGPT was limited to like 8,000, which was about 5,000 words. But here with the Cloud and its 100,000 token limit, we can feed it, you know, like 75 pages of text or huge PDFs and have it return detailed results. So I don't have the chat open. So Melissa, you want to pick a question?
So one of the questions asked from the group is, will journalism survive? Mark, are you asking like in the wake of AI specifically?
Yeah, sure. No, actually, I guess
Okay.
AI.
Just in general.
Well, no, because AI, in my mind, as I'm listening to this, because journalism has been referenced a bunch of times, is dying. And in Canada in particular, we know we have this particular problem that I'm sure is pervasive elsewhere, where the funding models have been hijacked and are broken, and advertising isn't funding good, rigorous, fear and favor-free journalism. So how will they survive? What could the future hold? Will AI help that, harm it? What, you get my drift?
Yep. Okay, so we've got Chris's question typed at the top. It's amazing how quick it works. And anybody that hasn't played around with any of these technologies, just go Google ChatGPT, type in a question. I played with it and I wrote what are some questions if I wanted to interview for ULU Public Relations? And it just listed a bunch of questions about my company.
All right, well, there's no surprises here in this list of results. I would say many things we've touched on. It says the ways that journalism has changed in the short term is automated news writing. We're already using it to write a lot of stuff. Sentiment analysis, which is pretty interesting. We can look at a whole bunch of people talking about stuff and, get some data on, are they talking positively or negatively? And it's very, very easy to do that these days. Misinformation detection, personalized news, and then just the virtual assistant stuff like we talk about us doing all the time. Let's look a little farther into the future and see if it has anything else. Let's
will the PR industry
one sec before we switch gears.
Okay, sure.
We're just gonna look 5 years into the future now. Automated interview transcriptions, that's already today. We're already having
Augmented writing already exists.
So,
Predictive analysis already exists.
It's having a hard time looking that far into the future, but synthetic media detection is an interesting one because that came up when we were talking about deep fakes
What
today.
about 20 years?
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, how is it going to know 20 years if it can't
I
even
know, but
survive,
it blows my mind every day.
Okay.
The other thing too is it might be worthwhile to pre-train the model and give it some context into what it is as a futurist looking into how AI will impact the future and write a longer prompt. So if we were looking in prompt engineering, writing a longer prompt about context and base information to give it some ideas so we can get a deeper question into that. That might help.
So we have a question from Kimberly. How can we ensure authenticity in ESG and impact messaging and reporting when AI can easily generate convincing content? Do you want to copy and paste that, Chris, so that you can capture it all in there?
Sure.
Sorry, Kim, maybe that question was just to our panel because we're definitely dipping into the panel Q&A, audience Q&A portion. So Robert or Lisa, do either of you want to answer that question?
Hey, Melissa, just before we jump off there, let's just finish this last little bit of the demo.
Okay.
I just said, so based on these trends in journalism, how can journalists and new organizations prepare themselves, develop strategy and tactics? And so I'm not necessarily suggesting that these strategies and tactics are the right ones, but, Robert talks a lot in his book about developing an AI mindset and thinking about the ways that we can talk back and forth with AI and what we can ask it for and stuff. And so these are the suggestions. It's predicted some trends, and now it's said, invest in training of your staff, develop ethical frameworks, evaluate the opportunities inside journalism, and take a look at the risks. And then it has a whole bunch of, specific tactics we can do to jump off into that space. So I just wanted to give an example of asking it a little bit of stuff to predict, some bigger stuff to predict, and then having it, build me some actions based on that. So sorry about that. We can jump back into your question now.
No worries. And I just realized, hi, Kimberly, that she addressed that directly to me. So I'm going to drop that question into the chat for everybody to see and for our panelists to see. To repeat that question, how can we ensure that authenticity in ESG and impact messaging and reporting when AI can easily generate convincing content?
I would argue that
and
you can create
a 30-second answer because
I would argue that AI can generate authentic, engaging content for your audience. It's about how you're going to prepare your model. I talk a lot about that. Like Chris mentioned, the AI mindset and prepping your AI. I talk about this a lot in my book, so that would be a good read. But more importantly, I think that I would argue that AI can work as an assistant to help you generate authentic conversation. And so, that's going to come into like the content that you're putting yourself as a content creator and the source that you're going to add. There's something called temperature where you're basically creating an effect when you're discussing things with your AI. And so by creating the right temperature, the context, and the information into the conversation, you'll be able to create that. That's my take. Lisa? Or somebody else?
You know what? I'm going to move on to the next question because we have a few more that we're definitely not going to get through. I'm just going to do one more from Heather Seabrook. And Heather, if I interpret this question, just please jump in and ask it yourself. How can senior corporate communications professionals that work more on the strategy and planning adapt to AI, i.e. Those that aren't in the trenches doing all the content and creations? I'm not sure how to answer that myself, so.
I'll go back to saying what Chris has said, using the AI mindset, like curiosity, lifelong learning, data literacy, awareness to ethics and how you're creating content, being adaptable, pushing your education, getting some practical exposure, attending event like this, and like continuing to learn, staying updated. AI training, like we're talking about using AI, but the way you get better at working with a model is by using it on a daily basis and working with it. So it's the same as when you're using Photoshop or any other tool. The more you're using it, the better you'll get at it. And I think soft skills and critical thinking, those are important. As soon as you involve critical thinking and ethical thinking into like your strategy, you can start building blocks on how you're going to evolve that over the long term.
All right. Thank you to our panel. You both probably blew many minds that logged in today. I just have a couple of housekeeping items in the final minute before we break. We have a few impact councils that are already in the calendar that you can register for now. The next one we have is September 27th, Gifting with Impact. 'Tis the season. So if you want to understand how to do that without spending a bunch of plastic and doing something that's generic and predictable, tune in. That should be an interesting one. Also, very relevant topic, and we've talked about it a bit just in our conversation today, but where is the future? Is there a future for ESG? We're going to be discussing that and unpacking it on October 4th. Jenna, if you could please drop the links for both of those sessions into the chat so people can register. Finally, we want to give a shout out to our media partner, 3BL Media. 3BL enables companies to quickly and easily distribute ESG related news and content to key stakeholders, investors, consumers, and ratings and ranking agencies. If you want to amplify your organization's ESG communications with distributions to global audiences, subscribe to get a membership with the 3BL. We use them. It's better than Cision and Meltwater if you're in this space. So I highly recommend you check them out. And that brings us to the end of the hour. As always, I will stay on for a little bit in case there's any trickling questions. But thank you to everybody, including my co-host, Chris Krug. You're so smart. I love chatting with you. I love learning from you. And our speakers were just absolutely wonderful. I'm really proud of the conversation that we had today. It was great.
Thank you, Dr. Costa. Thank you, Professor Scales.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.